to be done. Utah went through that same crisis in 2010, using some of their reserves, but not all of them. But they built up reserves for that rainy day, because those things will come along. So I would like to see us do anything that moves us to a point where we will get there. And let me tell you why I say it that way. If we required the United States to go to a balanced budget in 12 months, it would be disastrous. Right? Nobody thinks that's a good idea. But if we said we can get there in 10 years, and so every year we have to make this much progress, I think we could do it. It would be a soft landing, and I think it would be very healthy, and I would support it.
Do you see my point, where it has to be tied to something to determine the amount of income that we have to spend?
Yeah, I do.
And just not agreeing with that, would you be willing to spearhead an effort to begin to make that move? And I agree with you. It's going to be a big ship that has to be turned. But if everybody just sits around and says we need to, and nobody takes the lead, it never gets done.
Let me answer your question, and it's going to be longer, and hopefully you think I eventually do answer your question than you anticipated. One of my realities is how do I operate and move myself to a position where people will listen to me, and I can get other congressmen to join me. I won't surprise you if I go back there at the 100-day mark and say, look, I'm sponsoring this bill to bring the budget into control, then I get no play, I get no attention. So to answer your question is, one of my biggest goals is to position myself to be an influence on firearms, on public lands, so I can do that. Now we all fight this thing because the longer somebody is there, the more that happens, and we all hate it. I won't say we all hate it. We all struggle. Many of us, I'll rephrase it, many of us struggle with those who stay too long. And so it is this balance, but I'm working hard, and the reason I'm working hard, and the reason I'm having 17 town hall meetings is because I think hard work is how you get there, and results is how you get there to where you can have that ability, have that kind of influence. I'm going to go here and then. Okay, go ahead first. Yeah, that's fine. You don't mind. No, it's fine. Go ahead.
I think two easy, I don't want to say easy solutions, but very pinpointed solutions to that other question is to have a balanced budget amendment and a line item veto. Now, you say I'm not there long enough to get any backing by the other congressmen, but I would argue that actually you're positioned to get attention because you're a new set of eyes coming into Congress, which a lot of us in Utah are happy to see. So I would argue that the ones that have been there for decades have been living in that bubble in Washington for far too long to even think a balanced budget amendment or a line item veto is possible. But we've seen that almost happen 15, 20 years ago, where two people on the other side of the aisle came together and tried to pass the line item veto. But that takes care of Democrats and Republicans. But the budget is out of control, and quite honestly, to watch Republicans who have total control of Congress right now totally fail on this issue after they've been complaining for the last 8 years, I feel is unacceptable.
Yeah, I have a hard time arguing with anything that you just said. I will push back on one tiny thing, and that is, as a candidate, I said, well, we've got the House, we've got the Senate, we've got the presidency, we go fix all these things. Our hard reality is that Republicans don't have the Senate, and because of the 60-vote rule, did you want to?
No, and I'm hoping it's a bipartisan issue. I'm hoping the Democrats come along and go, okay, balanced budget amendment and a line item veto. That takes care of both sides. It doesn't hurt one side or the other any more than the other.
I would love if it was bipartisan. I'm not feeling it, but I would love if it was, if you could find that formula that made it so.
We've seen the federal government mushroom virtually out of control. The Constitution says that its responsibilities are defined and limited, And so when I was doing my taxes last year, I had this huge check to send to the federal government and a small one to send to Utah. They should be reversed. And so we're happy to hear that you are trying to rein that in. What we need to do is cut the federal government massively. It's like Eddie Childs in Texas, where I lived many years. He said, pave my streets, defend my shores, and stay the hell out of my life of the federal government. And lastly, I just want to say, I was an airline pilot, so I carried a gun every day in the cockpit. And I've been an educator the last 10 years at UVU as an instructor there. I've been armed in class every single day the whole time. I never worried about a shooter because I was prepared for it. So I am an advocate of educators actually becoming armed.
Thank you for being qualified to carry.
I totally want to say that I do support that if you as an educator feel comfortable with it and want to do that, you should be able to have that. I think it should be the option, not forced upon educators, as much as it should be a choice for educators.
We have some chairs up here if y'all want to sit down. You bring up a good point. I think what would scare anybody I know is saying teachers will carry, because then you're going to have teachers. And think about this. When you are a police department and you're showing up on the scene, let's say it's a schoolyard or something like that, you don't want 100 teachers in there with guns, right? I mean, that's one of those teachers is going to get shot by the police department, right? And so it has to be a very controlled, very trained scenario for it to be successful. Good. Those of you that just came, welcome. We just did a fan across, and to be fair, we'll start the fan this way and come back across and see if you all have any questions.
My son is 28 years old and he's paying for his own insurance. He's an adventurous guy. He travels all over the globe. He just found out that the insurance he is paying for the last year is for Idaho and Utah, and he's living in California right now. So tell me how you're going to help my son.
Interestingly, when I was in the thick of the campaign last year, May through November, healthcare was the single biggest issue. It's what everybody wants to talk about. I don't get asked about healthcare as nearly as much, and some of it is just these other issues like immigration that we're crowding it out. Let me tell you some good news that has happened with healthcare. The CHIP program, which takes care of 6 or 9 million, I forget the number, of our children across the country, has been funded for 10 years. It's very, very good news on all accounts, because when we don't fund those who need it most, they go into emergency rooms and it ends up costing us a lot more money. The CHIP program actually saves us money. It gives far better care to our kids. We funded our community health care centers in the budget that we're talking so much about. That's a really good thing as well. And the individual mandate was removed as part of the tax bill, which you don't like. Let me tell you my personal thoughts on the individual mandate. Conceptually, I understand why it was thought to be a good thing. You want to, with insurance, you want to spread the risk over as many people as possible. There were some problems with the mandate. One of those problems was, I personally know people who paid the penalty rather than buy the insurance. It was sad. Yeah, I mean, it's a terrible situation. I also believe it stifled innovation and things that would answer your question. Let me give you a good example. One of the models out there that I like a lot with healthcare is called direct pay or concierge service. There are clinics who will, for a fee, a monthly fee, somewhere I've heard as low as $35 and as high as $50, cover anything that you need in that clinic. So for $35 a month, you get stitches, you get infections, you get a broken bone, you get whatever you would go get taken care of in a clinic, strep throat, things like that. Excuse me. Part of doing 17 town hall meetings is a slight case of laryngitis, so you'll excuse me. So you have this model where you could get all of those things taken care of. Now, there's a problem, because if you came down with cancer or a brain tumor, that model has a big hole, and that hole can be filled with a catastrophic policy. So you would insure yourself for anything, let's say, over $10,000 a year or something like that. That policy is dramatically less expensive than a policy that tries to cover all your runny noses and things. My father was an independent insurance agent. His father was an independent insurance agent. I had certain lessons pounded into my head. One was you never get a ticket because that's your insurance cost. The other is you don't use insurance to pay for things that you can afford to pay for. When we try to insure for everything, we can't afford that. And so insurance is really there for those catastrophic things. So I love this model of a catastrophic policy. There is a gap that we would have to pay for if you got caught in that gap between what happens in a clinic and what happens with a catastrophic policy. But that would reduce healthcare costs dramatically. You couldn't do that with the mandated prepayment penalty, excuse me. If somebody wanted to join that, they also had to pay the penalty. And that's what, oh, thank you, perfect, thank you. That's why I say it stifled some of the answers to that question. So I don't have a specific for your son, other than say some good things are happening. And I actually believe, going back to the campaign, people kind of wanted to push me into this place where you just repeal Obamacare 100%, and then you have this kind of this crash landing of the healthcare system. And the idea is that it would somehow survive and put itself back together. And I think that would have been a bad idea. I think that's a little bit like saying we have to get a balanced budget in 1 year. And I think what you're seeing is some gradual changes to Obamacare instead of this radical ripping the guts out of it and doing it, what I call, I'll get to you in just a sec, what I call a soft landing, which is where, as we make these changes, the healthcare system can accommodate it.
I'd like to address her problem. So I'm a physician. I also ran a billing company for many years. So I was the opposite side of your insurance family. The proposal that you put on the table, unless it's a series of clinics nationwide that somebody could walk into, doesn't help at all. Because if you pay this local guy in Provo, but you move to California, what are you going to do? Fly back to Provo every time you need
Yeah. So
whatever. Let me finish. But there actually are reasonable solutions. In dealing with many insurance companies over the years, the most reliable payer out there currently available is Medicare. They are outstanding. They take a very small portion for administrative, pay out a tremendous amount of actual health care, pay rapidly, and pay a reasonable rate. I think a more reasonable solution would be a Medicare for all option for people to buy into insurance that is available nationwide, is well tested, and is quite excellent. That would be a much easier solution than your idea of individual little clinics that you might pay $50 a month here, and then the next month you're somewhere else and you got to pay another $50 to some other clinic. I don't know how that would actually help most people. And a $10,000 a year gap is actually quite difficult. I don't know what your current income is. I don't know what you've made over your lifetime, but coming up with $10,000 a year to cover a gap is actually quite difficult. And I don't see that as a reasonable solution to most people's healthcare problems.
So a couple of things. I threw out 10,000. It doesn't have to. The gap. Remember, you insure for what you can't afford to pay for. Understood. So the gap is what you can't afford to pay for. There were lots of places and lots of times in my life where the clinic would have been awesome for a family with 6 young kids. What I'm proposing is choice. Okay. And say, I'm not saying everybody should be on the clinic. I'm saying for some that will work, and it's a great solution. I'm not proposing a high deductible for everybody. I'm proposing the more choices, the more options, and maybe one of those options is the one you described as an option, but not for everybody. I would support. I think lots of options is good. There are, with your experience, you know, there are lots of things in your industry driving prices up. Prescriptions is a really good example. What I'm proposing is instead of this mass, okay, we just do away with Obamacare, is we just start one by one dealing with the forces driving these things up. I think we can take the cost of prescriptions and get them down. I think we can.
Well, when you say get rid of Obamacare, so what portions of Obamacare would you get rid of? The unlimited payment, you know, in the days before Obamacare, and I would see this as a provider and billing particularly, where people didn't realize that they had yearly and lifetime limits to their insurance. And all of a sudden, they had a heart attack, they had a stroke, they got cancer, and they went over their limits, and they went into bankruptcy, and they would come back my facilities. I'm a radiologist. Please, can't you do this for free? I don't have any money anymore. Well, I don't see that as a good model. So when you say throw out Obamacare, there are actually some excellent things that came into Obamacare. The most important one was getting rid of those yearly and lifetime caps, because that killed middle-class people. People who thought they were totally middle class, they thought they had enough money until Dad had his stroke.
I think we're kind of saying the same thing, which is leave what's good and one by one address things. And I actually think it's probably not accurate to say we're going to one by one dismantle Obamacare. A better way to say it is we're going to one by one tackle the things that we can improve in the healthcare world. Yes.
I just wanted to add to it that I was in that situation of deciding whether what I could afford for monthly payments. That catastrophic insurance was $650 a month for me. Number one. Number two, what is the payment that young people pay, or that all of us would pay into Obama? I think it was $750 a year penalty. I mean, where is that? $1,000, whatever. Well, I mean,
Benefits for like individuals, it was $670 some odd last year. I had to pay about 20 months.
Anyway, I'm just saying it's kind of a toss-up.
It was either that or I took the floor.
Yeah. And that's a terrible spot to put you in, right? So it's your worst. I'm sorry, go ahead and finish.
And it's, you know, it is a toss-up how we, choose where we pay. Do I pay the $650 and then still have $10,000 in my bank account in order to pay my medical costs? I chose not to have insurance, sir. So I would be the one that you would be seeing in that emergency room because it was prohibitive. My other thing is that I talked to my nephew about this. He was pissed off, very angry about having to pay the $750 or whatever it was. He said it was $750 at that point in time, and he said, "Oh my gosh, I cannot see living without it now." He said, "I hesitated, but now," he said, "I just don't worry about it."
Yeah, I grew up in a world without health insurance. My dad was insurance agent. He didn't insure us. You could survive that back then. There's things that could wipe you out, but not like that now. You can't survive it now, I agree. Okay, yes. Welcome.
So I go to Wasatch High School, and we're trying to start something to bring awareness to our community about all the stuff that's been happening with the Parkland and Florida stuff. And recently we were trying to get cops on every single school campus and trying to get more things in our school to make them safer, like metal detectors, or there's these things being put on the doors to make them lock or stop themselves so people can't get into it. And we have drills throughout our school system, especially in Utah, High School in California. We used to have drills once a month on this stuff. We've probably done them once a year. And I just was wondering how you
Well, thanks for coming this morning. Nice to have you from Wasatch, and thanks for getting involved. We did talk a little bit about this right at the first meeting, so I'll cover a little bit of it again, and then I'd be happy to talk to you afterwards and give you more specifics. But I think what you're asking is not unreasonable and actually really good. And that one of the ways that we eventually get to the point where we feel like our schools are safe, there's lots of layers, but one of those is that we're doing everything we can on the federal level, the state level, the county level, on the city level, and on the school board level, and in individual schools. And so a lot of what you're talking about is kind of a school board level, if that makes sense, where the school board would say, look, this is our policy. We're going to, some of these things need funding. We need to look to the county or the state or somebody for funding. Some of them don't need funding. The drill doesn't need a whole lot of funding. So I would encourage you to visit your school board meetings and do some things there. And I would also encourage you to identify things at each one of those levels, federal and state, where you would like to see changes, specific changes, and then work with your elected leaders on those changes. And one of the things we talked about before you came is that now is an environment where they're listening. Everybody's really listening to this now and want to try to figure out what those things are that will make you feel safe when you go to school.
I just think it'd be a good idea for not just our school, but all the schools.
Yeah, and one of the reasons I say school boards is a lot of these policies should be specific to geographic regions. We have to do things differently in Heber than they do in New York City. And we need to do things differently in Heber than they do in Salt Lake City. The needs are very different. And that's why some of these things are good at an individual level.
I was just going to comment, there's a meeting with the school board March 8th at 6:30 to discuss these issues and to talk about things we're implementing, getting more officers in the schools, and to talk about the relationship with students, teachers, and law enforcement. So that is happening, so please.
Yeah. Right now, I know in Provo School District, that I'm really familiar with, and I think it's probably very similar throughout the state, is many of our schools have a resource officer assigned to them. But we have not typically sent them to the schools to secure. We've usually sent them to the schools to build relationships, to deal with minor misdemeanors in the school, and things like that. And I think part of the dialogue needs to be, do we change their focus? Not 100%, but some, to where we're now moving their office right up to the front of the school, right up to the door, where people come in with their bigger cousins. When I talked to the superintendent in Provo, he said, in the district he came from, that school resource officer always parked his police car at the curb right in front of the school, so everybody saw it. Right? And it has a presence there. Yeah.
Changing the subject just because I don't know how much time you have left. So I just wanted to, which a lot of this you already know, I know you have a huge district that goes clear down to the southern part of the state, but I think Wasatch County, as you know, is one of the fastest growing counties in the nation, a lot of it driven by the tourism industry. A lot of people moved from Park City over here, or the employees that keep Park City running are actually living in Wasatch County. So real estate values are tied directly to tourism, which helps everybody, every homeowner. But I'd like you to talk a little bit about public lands, and just to reiterate the fact that not everyone in your district feels one way about tourism in our state and the importance of public lands.
So let's make sure we do that, and we haven't brought up immigration. So I'll go from public lands to immigration, because I'm sure a lot of you have questions about that. So we've talked about me being the new guy. Well, at 3 weeks, President Trump announces he's coming to the state of Utah to change the national monument. And there is, you are right, not everybody agrees. And not only do they disagree, they're sometimes adamantly disagree and have a lot of, I would say, lack of trust on the two sides. And so here's the new guy, right, and he's coming to Utah to announce a change in my district, and I don't mind telling you, I'm not ready for it. And in a perfect world, I would have had years to be down there and understand the situation, build relationships, and understand what needs to be done. So President Trump, and I'll go over just some of the specifics, because I find people know this in fine detail or they know almost nothing about it. So just a couple of details on this. President Obama designated 1.35 million acres down in San Juan County as a national monument. That thrilled a lot of people and angered a lot of people. President Trump came and changed that designation and moved it from 1.35 down to a couple 100,000 acres, a dramatic reduction in area. That thrilled some people and some angered some people. What I have found by talking to all these different stakeholders is, interestingly, they all want pretty much the same thing. Everybody wants that land protected. I don't know anybody that wants to destroy that land. But they have very strong opinions about who gets to decide how it's protected, and who's making the decisions. And they don't trust, one group doesn't trust the federal government to make the decisions, the other group doesn't trust the locals to make the decisions. So I introduced a bill that has done a pretty good job at angering all of them. It must be. What I've tried to do with my bill is to, first and foremost, make sure that the land is protected. It is an amazing resource, and there are antiquities in that area that must be saved and protected. And so it takes a kind of a combination of President Obama's declaration and President Trump's, and tries to bring in new things to do what everybody says that we all want to do. So for example, it puts a mineral withdrawal into the larger 1.35 million acres, which says there can be no mining in that area. Great protection for the area.
Excuse me, does that include wells, oil and gas wells?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Pardon?
Uranium?
Yes. It's a mineral withdrawal.
Okay.
It's
For the whole
the
designated area?
yes, 5 million acres. It's a mineral withdrawal. Only on future claims, which is also what President Obama was. You can't go back to current claims on future claims. It also, one of the problems is 1.35 million acres. There are 2 BLM agents assigned to protect this area. That's no way, right? So it assigns 20 new personnel into the area to monitor and protect the area. In addition, it identifies and it puts in place an archaeological protection unit, and their job is to identify what those 20 people should be protecting, what's there that's antiquities and things like that that needs to be protected. So it goes much further than even President Obama's declaration to protect the area. Why does nobody like it? Well, because many people are angry that President Trump reduced it, and anything short of going back to President Obama's designation is going to make them angry. The locals, some of them, are very concerned about the mineral withdrawal. They made their livelihoods off of mining down there, and are concerned that we're taking that away from them. So many of them don't like it. And so thus we have a bill that the guy with 3 weeks puts in